Hello again. This is a recap of some key points from week 7 in our course, and almost exclusively in this video I want to talk about this textbook, Edgar Schein, Organizational Culture and Leadership. Edgar Schein, Organizational Culture and Leadership. Schein's book runs to about 400 pages and is really a master work. He is an author that if you have a Doctor of Management degree from any university, you need to know about organizational culture, and you need to know what Edgar Schein has to say about it. He has spent a life's work digging into this topic, and his book is based on real work in real organizations. It's not just a pet theory. If you understand the importance of culture, how to perceive it, how to change it, how to understand it, you will be far ahead of everyone else in the organization who doesn't have that skill. It's that important. Upon completion of this course, you need to understand this book and Schein's work on organizational culture backward and forward. Let me begin with the discussion, as I always do, but with definitions. The rigorous study of any discipline begins with definitions, and so let's take a look at his definition on page 18 in Schein's book. His definition is in one sentence, but it's in 5 parts. So let's take a look at each of those parts. The first part of the sentence says, the culture of a group is a pattern of shared basic assumptions. So I would suggest you get a highlighter and highlight those 3 words on page 18. Shared basic assumptions. They are fundamental beliefs that are not held by 1 or 2 people, but are held by the group generally. The second part of the definition says, the shared basic assumptions have been learned by a group as it solved its problems of external adaptation and internal integration. So again, with your highlighter, I would suggest highlighting the word learned. And this isn't something that was read and accepted at a cognitive level. These shared basic assumptions have been learned by its issues that it is faced with external adaptation and internal integration. Those are the first 2 parts of his definition. The third part, Schein says, which has worked well enough to be considered valid. So you have a group, you have shared basic assumptions that have been learned, and they have been dealt with, they've been used, they've been put into practice well enough that the group feels that they are valid. They are valid learnings. The fourth part says that those valid learnings are taught to the new members. Aha! Now we're coming to a critical part. Not only is this a set of shared basic assumptions, but there's some proselytizing going on. When a new member joins the group, consciously, maybe unconsciously, these shared basic assumptions will be spread around. They will be shared with the new members who come in. And then the fifth part says that those basic assumptions that have been taught to new members, they're taught to those new members as the correct way to perceive and think and feel in relation to those problems. I was reminded in thinking about Chris's comments in our conference work in week 7, where Chris has talked about the good old boy network. There you have some shared basic assumptions learned by a group, taught to new members as the correct way. It's kind of, this is the way we do things here. And as a matter of fact, although the definition of culture by Schein has 5 parts, and it's every word is specifically defined. All words are used for a purpose. We always have shorthand definitions of things. And one of the best shorthand definitions of organizational culture that I know of is it's the way we do things around here. It's the way we do things around here. And that's easy to remember, and although it's a shorthand definition, will serve you well in terms of what is organizational culture. Let's look at some questions that you can ask yourself in a group in relationship to its culture. We're all participants in a culture. There's a family culture. There's a culture in our religious organizations. Maybe you belong to a fraternal organization or some community-based group. Your college, if you're employed at a college, your employer, wherever that is, you're always a part of a culture, and you're influenced by that culture. And so you might ask yourself these questions in relation to any of those cultures. One, is it internally or externally focused? Is it internally focused? Does the group spend a lot of time, quote, contemplating its navel, and with people hitting on issues of interest to each other, sometimes in a petty way? Or is it externally focused? Could be in a optimistic and constructive way, or could be in a fearsome way, a worrisome way. Is the organization open to discussing problems? That's a key question to ask yourself when you're in any culture. When I began work at Baltimore City Community College in 1990 and was having a President's Cabinet meeting, and I was entreating the staff to tell me more about an issue, a problem that we were having at the college, one of the staff members who had been there previously said, "Oh, Dr. X never wanted to hear about problems." He never wanted to hear about problems. That was part of the culture. And the leadership at the college prior to the state of Maryland taking over the institution was one that wanted to repress that kind of discussion. Another question you can ask is, how is disagreement handled? Is candor commonplace, or is it rare? How willing are people? How able are people to speak up and express their opinion? A corollary to that is, what is undiscussable in the organization? It used to be in the Victorian era that to talk of sex was a topic that was taboo. Well, obviously in our society it's no longer taboo, but we have other topics that are taboo within organizations. That's important to think about. What are the unwritten rules? What are the guidelines, so to speak, the human relations guidelines, that if you stray outside of them, you're going to be chastised by someone, or frowned, or dismissed, or ignored? Is the atmosphere one of cooperation or cooperation? When someone's facing a problem, do people nearby in the workplace say, "Well, I can help you with that. I have a little extra time. Let me see what I can do"? Or do people act in silence and let you solve it on your own? And finally, you can ask yourself, what kind of phrases do you hear over and over in that organization that you're trying to analyze? Again, one of the phrases that I heard, not often, I have to say, when I came to Baltimore City Community College, but once in a while when we were discussing whether a product was ready to go out the door, it was a report that was complete, someone would say, "Well, it looks like it's good enough for government work," and then laugh or chuckle. That was never funny to me because we were in the government. We were a state agency at that time, and it reflected a dismal view of what our performance standards were. That's another expression about the culture of the college at that time. So think about the culture of the groups that you're a member of. In fact, a radical idea is to think about the culture of this class that you are in. Even online, even with only 7 students who rarely see each other, there is an organizational culture. Every cohort in the DMCCPA program has a culture, and generally it's a different culture from previous cohorts. So think about that too. Let me close with a few comments about the culture of Baltimore City Community College when I arrived there to become president, and after the state had taken over the institution. The decade of the 1980s was replete with serious problems of almost any kind that you could name. There were enrollment problems, there were funding problems, both operating and capital funding problems. There were morale issues. They had recurring material weaknesses in the audit. They had physical plant issues of unfunded and, liabilities for their operating budget. So let me tell you about this culture. In one of the most extreme examples of that, just prior to the state taking over the college, the Board of Trustees decided to have an award for outstanding teaching at the institution. This was going to be $1,250, not a bad amount for 1990. The Faculty Senate of what was then the Community College of Baltimore said they refused to participate in it, that any faculty member who was awarded this outstanding faculty performance award would refuse to accept it. Relationships were that fractured. The culture was that shattered for cooperation and common effort. And so that is the most illustrative example I can give about that. People did have a caring attitude about students and their struggles, but it was a negative culture. It was a pessimistic one. There was a kind of psychological paralysis of being stuck, of being struggling people. Phrases that you'd often hear were, "It's not my fault," "It's not my problem," or "They don't understand us." Generally, us meant everyone else outside the college. You also heard the two-word sentence, "We can't," "I can't." And being a bit more specific as well, there was a faculty union at the college prior to the state taking over the institution, because the state didn't have any unionized employees. That union was terminated, no longer in effect when the new institution was set up. That element of the culture of a unionized collective bargaining type faculty was difficult to change. The faculty senate, which of course continued on the new institution, became in many ways a proxy for the union. Proxy for the union. I met on a regular basis with the president and the vice president of the faculty senate, and I could always tell that this culture was difficult to change, because I always felt after those meetings, and they were cordial and I think we worked fairly well together, I felt that the members, the president and the vice president of the union, felt it was their job to bring grievances to me, and it was my job to solve them. They did very little, or felt very little, that what we exchange ideas about, things that they were trying to convey to me, things I was trying to convey to them, that they had any responsibility in going back to the faculty senate to explain or transmit or help understand issues that the Board of Trustees and the senior leadership were trying to put on the table. So a lot of things changed in the 12 years that I was the president there. I don't want to make this sound like it was a very difficult situation. It was the best job I ever had, and the college made a lot of progress. It ended up more positive, more optimistic. Enrollment was up, funding was up, both operating and capital. Student success rates were up, outreach to business and industry, local schools were all up. But I cite the example about the culture with the faculty senate because that is the most telling example, I think, about how embedded a culture can be within an organization. We had about 400 employees, about 120 of them were faculty members. And that essence of the way we do things around here was, as each group of new faculty were hired, that was something that was taught and made changing the culture that much more difficult. So that's my 2 cents worth for today. Keep up